Do you ever feel like you are watching the world from behind a glass wall, perfectly able to see it, but completely unable to touch it? You walk through crowded streets, sit in rooms full of people, scroll through endless social feeds, and yet something inside you remains untouched, unreached. You are there, but not really there. Dostoevsky called this the tragedy of the hyperconscious man, the person who thinks too much, feels too deeply, sees too clearly, and because of this clarity, cannot belong. This is not loneliness. Loneliness wants connection. This is alienation. Alienation knows connection is impossible. And if you have ever felt this, you are not broken. You are awake. And Dostoevsky spent his entire life writing about you. Dostoevsky understood something most people refuse to admit. The modern world does not reward authenticity. It rewards performance. Every interaction becomes a transaction. Every conversation, a calculation. You walk into a room and immediately feel it. The unspoken rules, the invisible scripts, everyone playing their part. And you? You cannot play along. Not because you are better, but because you see the game too clearly to participate. This is what Dostoevsky called hyperconsciousness, the disease of being too aware. Most people move through life with a comfortable level of self-awareness. They know enough to function, but not enough to question. They participate without thinking. They belong without effort. But the hyperconscious person cannot stop thinking, cannot stop analyzing, cannot turn off the voice that narrates every interaction, every gesture, every word. And this voice creates distance, a permanent gap between you and everyone else. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky writes through his narrator, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man." This is not self-pity. This is diagnosis. The underground man is sick with consciousness, poisoned by thought. He watches others live naturally, instinctively, and he envies them. Not for their happiness, but for their ability to be unconscious, to simply exist without the burden of endless self-reflection. And here is the trap. The more you think, the less you can act. The more you analyze social interactions, the less natural you become. You rehearse conversations in your head. You replay moments for hours afterward. You see every possible interpretation of every gesture. And this creates paralysis. You become a spectator in your own life, watching, analyzing, never participating, because participation requires a certain blindness, a willingness to act without complete understanding, and you lost that willingness years ago. The social mask versus the authentic self becomes the central war. You know what people expect. You can see the role you are supposed to play. The cheerful coworker, the agreeable friend, the enthusiastic participant. And you can perform this role. You have learned the script, but every performance exhausts you, because it requires you to suppress everything you actually think and feel. The mask protects you from rejection, but it also prevents connection, because no one is connecting with you. They are connecting with the character you are playing, and you are still behind the glass, still watching, still alone. Dostoevsky gave this experience a character, a voice, a philosophy, the underground man. This figure appears in Notes from Underground and represents the apex of alienated consciousness. He is intelligent, perceptive, deeply self-aware, and completely unable to function in normal society. He despises the people around him, not because they are bad, but because they are unconscious. They live by instinct, by habit, by social programming, and he cannot. The underground man writes, "I swear to you, gentlemen, that to be overly conscious is a disease, a real, thorough disease." Sate, think about that. Consciousness as disease. Most philosophies celebrate awareness, enlightenment, waking up. But Dostoevsky saw the cost. The more conscious you become, the more isolated you are, because consciousness creates distance. It turns life into a subject to be studied rather than an experience to be lived. Here is what makes the underground man so painful to read. He knows exactly why he suffers. He understands his psychology completely. He can articulate his problems with brilliant precision. And none of this helps. Knowledge does not cure him. Awareness does not free him. In fact, his awareness makes everything worse, because he sees how trapped he is. He watches himself sabotage relationships. He observes himself withdrawing from connection. And he cannot stop, because stopping would require him to become unconscious again, to stop analyzing, to stop thinking, and that is impossible. Dostoevsky shows us that the underground man wants connection desperately. He craves belonging. He fantasizes about being part of something larger than himself. But the moment he encounters real human contact, he recoils. He finds reasons to reject it. He invents conflicts. He creates distance. Not because he wants to be alone, but because intimacy terrifies him. Because intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires you to stop performing, to drop the mask, to let someone see you as you actually are. And for the hyperconscious person, that feels like death. This is the paradox Dostoevsky spent his career exploring. The people who think most deeply about connection are often the least able to experience it. The people who understand human nature most clearly are often the most alienated from humanity. Intelligence becomes a curse. Awareness becomes a prison. And the glass wall grows thicker with every insight. Why does intelligence so often lead to isolation? Because intelligence reveals complexity, and complexity makes simple action impossible. When you understand how many factors influence every decision, every relationship, every moment, you become unable to move naturally. You see too much. Consider the difference between an amateur and a master in any field. The amateur acts with confidence because they do not know what they do not know. The master hesitates because they understand all the variables, all the risks, all the possible failures. Now apply this to human relationships. The average person approaches social interaction with instinct. They feel what to say. They sense when to speak and when to listen. They do not analyze every word. They do not question every motive. They participate. But the intelligent person sees beneath the surface. They notice the power dynamics. They recognize the manipulation. They understand the unspoken contracts. And this knowledge makes genuine participation impossible. Dostoevsky wrote, "To love someone means to see them as God intended them." But the hyperconscious person struggles with this. They cannot see people as God intended. They see people as psychology textbooks, as collections of trauma and conditioning, as actors playing roles. And this vision, while accurate, destroys intimacy. Because love requires a certain willful blindness, a choice to focus on the ideal rather than the real, to see potential rather than limitation. And the hyperconscious mind cannot make this choice. But here is where Dostoevsky offers something unexpected. Not a cure, but a reframe. The underground man is not wrong to feel alienated. He is responding honestly to a dishonest world. His refusal to participate in social performance is not pathology. It is integrity. The problem is not his consciousness. The problem is that he mistakes alienation for wisdom. He thinks his isolation proves his superiority. He believes his inability to connect confirms his intelligence. This is the trap. You feel disconnected, so you tell yourself you are simply more aware than others. You cannot participate, so you convince yourself the game is not worth playing. You watch from behind the glass and call it clarity. But Dostoevsky knew better. Alienation is not enlightenment. Distance is not wisdom. And the refusal to engage is often just fear dressed up as philosophy. The remedy is not to become less conscious. You cannot unlearn what you know. You cannot unsee what you have seen. The remedy is to recognize that connection does not require unconsciousness. It requires courage. The courage to act despite complete understanding. The courage to participate despite seeing all the flaws. The courage to be vulnerable even when you know exactly how you could be hurt. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this dynamic from a different angle. He called it the pathos of distance, the natural separation that forms between those who think deeply and those who do not. Nietzsche saw this distance as necessary for greatness. He believed that to create something truly valuable, you must separate yourself from the herd. You must embrace your outsider status. You must use your alienation as fuel. But Nietzsche also warned about the danger of this path. When you separate yourself too completely, you risk losing your humanity. You begin to see other people as objects, as obstacles, as inferior beings who simply do not understand. And this contempt becomes its own prison, worse than the original alienation. Because now you are not just isolated. You are isolated and bitter, cut off and resentful. Dostoevsky and Nietzsche agreed on the problem, but diverged on the solution. Nietzsche said, embrace your distance. Use it. Transform it into power. Dostoevsky said something more difficult. He said, carry your consciousness into connection anyway. Do not abandon awareness, but do not let awareness paralyze you either. Learn to hold both, the clear sight and the willing participation, the knowledge of human limitation and the choice to love anyway. This is where practical steps become essential. First, recognize that alienation and solitude are not the same thing. Alienation is passive. It happens to you. You feel pushed out, rejected, unable to connect. Solitude is active. You choose it. You create space for yourself not because you cannot connect, but because you need time to process, to think, to restore yourself. The shift from alienation to solitude is the shift from victim to creator. Second, practice what Dostoevsky called humble love. This is not romantic love. This is the choice to engage with another human being while fully aware of their flaws, their limitations, their humanity. It means dropping the demand for perfection, dropping the need for others to understand you completely, dropping the fantasy that connection should be effortless. Instead, you engage knowing it will be difficult, knowing you will be disappointed, knowing the glass wall will always be there to some degree, and choosing connection anyway. Third, find your underground man moments and name them. Notice when you are about to sabotage a relationship because intimacy feels too risky. Notice when you are withdrawing into analysis to avoid feeling. Notice when you are performing superiority to protect yourself from rejection. The underground man could see all of this in himself, but he could not stop. You can. Not perfectly, not consistently, but sometimes, and sometimes is enough. Fourth, create something. Dostoevsky turned his alienation into literature, his isolation into insight, his suffering into stories that connected with millions. You do not have to write novels, but you have to create, because creation is the bridge between the inner world and the outer world. It is how you translate what you see behind the glass into something others can recognize and value. So where does this leave you? Still conscious, still aware, still able to see through the social performance, but no longer trapped by what you see. Because you understand now that hyperconsciousness is not a life sentence. It is a choice point. You can use your awareness to justify isolation, or you can use it to deepen connection. Not by becoming less aware, but by becoming more courageous. Dostoevsky spent years in a Siberian prison camp, surrounded by murderers and thieves, cut off from intellectual society, forced into proximity with people who had nothing in common with him. And this experience transformed him, not because it made him less intelligent, but because it taught him that connection does not require similarity. It requires compassion. The willingness to see the humanity in someone even when you understand exactly how broken they are. This is the final insight. The glass wall is real, but it is not impenetrable. You can reach through it, not by pretending it is not there, not by dulling your awareness, but by choosing to act despite what you know, by loving despite seeing clearly, by connecting despite understanding the risks. The underground man ends his notes with a confession. He says he wrote all of this down not to convince anyone of anything, but simply because he had to speak. He had to be heard, even if no one understood, even if no one cared. This is the truth of alienation. You are not looking for solutions. You are looking for witnesses, for someone who sees you behind the glass and acknowledges that you exist. So if you have felt this, if you have lived behind that glass wall, if you have watched the world from a distance that feels permanent, know this. Dostoevsky saw you. He wrote about you. He spent his life trying to articulate exactly what you feel. And his message was not that you need to change. It was that your suffering has meaning. Your alienation is not proof that you are broken. It is proof that you are awake. Now the question is what you will do with that wakefulness. Will you let it isolate you further? Or will you carry it into the world as a gift? The choice is yours. But the glass wall only becomes a prison if you stop trying to reach through it. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who might be watching from behind their own glass. Subscribe for more psychological wisdom from the great thinkers. And remember what Dostoevsky wrote in The Idiot. Beauty will save the world. Not perfection, not understanding, not even connection. Beauty. The courage to create meaning in the margins, to find value in the very alienation that threatens to destroy you. That is the path forward. That is the remedy. That is how you turn the disease of consciousness into the gift of wisdom.